Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist, and I've been working on a game. And about a year ago I was tired of fiddling with FBX settings, so I decided to try to make my own animation pipeline. That ended up being this BAnim's project, and after using it and adding things to it for about a year, I feel like it's a tool that's pretty useful. What I'd like to do today is start by installing it, showing you how you do that, and then going through each of the features in some amount of detail. So first things first, in Blender here, you install it the same as you do any other add-on. You go to your preferences, you click install, select the exporter zip, and install it. Once it's installed, the very first thing you'll want to do is this BAnim export path will be blank. You'll want to maybe go to your Unity project and make a folder for your animations and copy the path for that and paste it in. Oh, that doesn't work. You want to go to your Unity project, show it in Explorer, copy the path for it, and then paste that into your Blender preferences. Use generic rig names is a more advanced option that replaces the name of the character with rig, which basically lets you play an animation from any character on any other character because they're all rig. If you want to do that, you do have to rename your the root object in your, not the root bone, but the armature object in Unity to be rig as well. So that's installed, the add-on for Blender. You can find it in the In panel in Blender, the sidebar panel, under the DGH tab, BAnim exporter. The second half is in Unity. You need to install the Unity package. You can do that by choosing Assets Import Package, Custom Package, and browsing to it, or you can drag and drop the .unity package file into Unity. It'll pop up. It's just these three scripts. The main ones are the importer and the UI for the importer. Once that imports, Unity will be able to understand the .banim file format. So if we come back over here, select the rig and export this animation, then in the character 5 folder, we will have a new walk animation. All right. So let's go through all of the options. The first option is the source. You can either select the timeline or actions. If you select timeline, it will export the frame range here in the timeline and the visual transforms of what you see on the screen. So what you see is exactly what you get. That means I know some FBX options don't export constraints right. Constraints I'll export fine. You can constrain things to physics simulations, the belts and stuff. That all works. You can layer other actions in the NLA. Whatever you see in your scene, that's how it will be exported to the animation file. The other option is kind of a legacy option. It exports from a list of actions and a text block. I wouldn't recommend using it. It's not as cool as using the timeline option. Obviously, the sort of a limitation in how you work with the timeline is each object in the scene can have its own name, but it can only have one name. So the best way to work then is for each animation to be in its own separate blend file, so that name can stay the same and you don't have to edit the name, or you don't potentially overwrite an animation by not changing the name. So yes, the second option is name. That's only available for the timeline. If you do an action, it exports the actions and uses the name of the action. If you export the timeline, you have to name it. Then the next option is partial rig. This is a better demonstration for that. What partial rig allows you to do is export a subset of bones from the rig. It allows you to do things similar to using avatar masks on layers in the animator, but because only a few bones in the rig are animated, you don't actually need the mask.
So the way this works is you check partial rig. You need to create a partial rig action. If there isn't one created, that button will appear prompting you to make one. That action is called BAnim partial. You then just have to select the bones you want to include. You select the bones you want to export animation on. So in this case, this is an animation of him pulling out the knife, and the animation is just on his right arm there. So I selected all the bones in the right arm. We're in the BAnim partial animation. All you have to do is insert a keyframe. When you insert a keyframe, Blender creates groups with the bone name. Only bones that have a group in the BAnim partial action will get exported. Once you've added the keyframe and you're happy with your selection, you can just close that action and then export the animation. If we then go back to Unity and select the animation, you can see that it's playing on only the arm. The next option is a seamless loop. For that one, we should go back to the walking animation because it's a loop. The way seamless loop works is you just check it, and then you need to enter a value for the overlap. The way that works is that essentially the number of frames you specify for the overlap, it will cut that number of frames off of the beginning of the animation. It'll move them over to the end of the animation and then blend into them so that the new last frame of the animation matches and continues perfectly into the first frame of the animation, because before it got moved from the beginning, that was the very next frame. So that's how the seamless loop works. You'll need to figure out, if you did like a walk cycle loop, you probably know how many frames are in a cycle. Otherwise, you'll have to figure out how many frames back. To get the best result, the action of what's overlapping the general motion should be the same. The right leg should be going forward, the left leg going backwards in both for it to blend well. The next option is root motion. This option is for the custom root motion. The BAnim importer can import the standard Unity root motion. In my project, I wanted more control over how the root motion was applied, so I came up with a custom way of applying it. And that basically entails adding a bone that's a child of the root bone called root motion. And you can sort of imagine that this bone is a joystick that's permanently pushing the root transform around. So then the local transforms of this root motion bone is the velocity of the root bone in the scene. This walking animation has a velocity in the Z direction, which would mean that when you export it and the exporter it'll calculate that velocity and then set that to be the local position of this root transform. And then in Unity, you can read that value and reapply it to move your game object around the world. And those are all of the options in the Blender panel. The only other one is to export, and that exports the animation clip. In Unity, there's import settings. The first option is type. By default, that doesn't do anything, but you can extend the import script to have more types and assign those types based on the file name or some other criteria, or you can just select them manually. And then you could, if you have an animation database or something along those lines, then it can be a useful way to group animations together. The start and end frame let you trim the clip. The trim slider also trims the clip. Those do the same thing. Loop time lets you choose whether the clip is a loop or not. So since this is drawing the knife, it shouldn't be a loop. Root zeroing. If you have root zeroing off, wrong one. Turn up loop. If you have root zeroing off, then the mesh will walk away from its origin. Origin's still back here. If you turn it on, then no matter how the root bone was animated in the Blender scene, when the importer was set, it transforms to 0 every frame, basically.
Finally, we have the Unity root motion option, which you can turn on. For that to work, you do have to have root motion on in the animator. And then they'll be able to move around. The other features it has are exporting markers as animation events. Animation events in Unity use the messaging system to call functions on in components on the same game object that the animator's on. By default, there's just one of those. In the read events function, it assigns the BAnim event method, which you can use by creating a public void BAnim event method. That gets passed the event name. The event name is the name of the marker in Blender. And I have comments in this script, which kind of talk about how you could expand that to have different functions for generic events or visual effects or sound effects. I think that's a typo. There we go. That's animation events. You can do lots of cool stuff with it. One thing to note is if you have markers that begin with an underscore, those are ignored. And there's actually a operator, which you can find in the search menu, called toggle markers. Toggle timeline markers, which you could assign a keyboard shortcut to as well if you wanted, or add to quick favorites. And what it does is it adds that underscore or removes it from the selected markers. So that is easy if you are like, actually, I didn't like my footstep sound. You could just select them all and turn them off. Let's go back over here. The other thing it can do is custom properties. If you name a custom property in Blender, beginning with capital PROP underscore, then the exporter will recognize that as a property you want to export and will create a float curve for it. So in this case, the way I'm using them is to essentially parent the knife to the leg or the hand at different points in time in the animation. And then I have a script that sort of mimics the constraints in Blender to choose which bone it's attached to. You could also use it for blend shapes or facial animation, probably, or I don't know. Anything you can control with a float curve, it could be useful for. An important thing to note about the custom properties is that those are custom properties on the armature data, not the object. Objects also have custom properties, but in the extras zip file is this root motion demo script. And it demonstrates how you could read and apply the custom root motion option that can be selected in Blender. Here, if we export these animations again, and you can see both of these are in the same file, but they have different animation names, and exporting them is as simple as selecting both of them and clicking export. So now we have that animation in here. Make sure it's still in the animator. It is. And then we have this root motion demo script on these game objects. If we play this and select playback, this will trigger the animation on both characters. And you can see that both of the game objects moved and rotated themselves with the root motion, and the playback played on both of them at the same time and matches up the same as it is in Blender. But it's two completely separate animations playing on two entities that are not attached to each other than by this script that positions them correctly before playing the animation. And besides that, the other extras that's included is this BAnim driver script, which I use to move the knife into his hand when we play the knife draw animation. So you can see here, he doesn't actually pull the knife out, it's just his hand. But if we were to put this animation in here, then he should pull out the knife. Oh, he will pull out the knife if you... So that's the other thing. In the importer, there's right above the read events, there's read properties. And there, the properties are assigned to this BAnim properties script. But we want to apply them to the BAnim drivers script. Again, this could be customized. You could have different scripts for different characters, or in this case, this BAnim driver script is sort of set up where there would be one script for all characters, and then you could select subsets of properties that would apply to one character over another. There's different ways you could do that. The script isn't the most optimized, but hopefully it demonstrates the point. If we do that and then re-import this animation, now he should pull the knife out. Well, sort of pulls out the knife. There we go. I just had to re-export the animation. I don't know. I think that maybe the knife got included in the partial rig when I set it up. But you can see that on the character, the knife in hand right is animated by the script, and that we can then use to choose which transform to copy, whether it's the hand or the belt. So I think that is basically everything it can do so far. Everything I went over here is probably explained better and in fewer words in the documentation, so you can check that out. There's a link in the description. And then the Gumroad page for it is also in the description. And if you have questions, feel free to leave a comment. That's all I've got for now, so thank you very much for watching.